Hello, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm speaking with Jeff Hughes, National Senior Director of Distributed Energy Resources at McKinstry. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Always good to sit down with a fellow Arizona State Sun Devil.
Yes, forks up indeed, and I won't say anything bad about the Wildcats. You've been in this industry for quite some time. How has the distributed solar energy landscape evolved since you started deploying clean energy solutions?
Yeah, so I've been in the space for about 15 years, focused in public sector, private sector, working utility type projects, working for asset owner operators. And what I would say is, things have just gotten faster and more complicated. Whether it's policy, whether it's, the complexity of the introduction of IRA and the labor impacts to our projects, the equipment procurement landscape has totally changed with COVID and the supply chain. And so I think it's increasingly difficult or fun, depending on how you look at it, to kind of put these projects together or be on the owner side, like in the commercial kind of real estate space, and try to figure out how to navigate all this.
When we talk specifically to McKinstry, where you've been at for a number of years, what is their mission as it relates to the built world and our environment?
McKinstry, 65-year-old company, but the best way I would characterize it is, at the forefront of innovation in the built environment. And so over the last decades, we're a traditional MEP insulation provider in the Pacific Northwest. We have presence in about 20 states. We work on energy efficiency. We work on clean energy generation. We work on building consulting services. And at the heart of all that is bringing together decarbonizing the built world. And so whether we're saving materials or whether we're saving energy or generating energy, we're trying to make an impact in the built environment in that way.
Much needed today. So thank you for your work. For commercial property owners out there who might be starting to investigate whether they should go solar, add battery, EV, et cetera, they're out in the marketplace. They're seeing like solar developers, commercial installers. They're seeing energy service companies and energy as a service providers. Can you help folks understand, especially those last ones, which probably is where McKinstry slots in, so they can understand exactly those differences in the market?
Yeah. So, when you're thinking about a clean energy project, you have a couple choices. It kind of starts with, looking at your portfolio and thinking about, okay, where do I want to apply this idea? Is it a single site to run a pilot? Is it across my fleet of buildings? And sometimes boiling the ocean can be a little bit tough. So we may recommend looking at a pilot kind of situation, which will allow you to then advance to the idea of finance. And so how are you going to procure this and fund it? And there's different options from, cash purchase to a power purchase agreement, which you sort of pay for the generation of the asset as you go. And it's a lower risk proposition in terms of somebody else owns that asset. Energy as a service is similar to power purchase agreement, but generally it can be applied to different types of assets than renewable assets. So not exclusively, but sometimes. For example, energy efficiency can be applied in that model as a service. Central plants can be often applied in an as a service model. And again, you're sort of paying a fixed payment sort of now and over time in exchange for deploying all the CapEx up front.
So it sounds like it allows folks to enter into a renewable energy opportunity without a bunch of upfront capital and still benefit from the energy over time of a renewable asset.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks to think about those options as a spectrum of options, that you should explore them all and find a partner that can help you sort of figure out where you sit on that spectrum, which is varied by organization and risk reward appetite.
A follow-up, because you mentioned a portfolio. Do you guys have the ability at McKinstry, if someone's got a large portfolio of properties across the U.S., to sort of like look site by site and say, maybe this is more viable, this might have a shorter payback period, et cetera?
Yeah, we actually do that all the time. And it's one of the first steps, if we're engaged at that point in the process with our clients, to help them understand where to start. So let's say, somebody's got facilities in 20 states and, there's a whole bunch of utility data and they got a whole bunch of proposals in front of them. They go, what do we do? And that's a part of the role McKinstry likes to play at the beginning, is helping shape and consult, what's the best thing for this particular building owner.
By and large, those utility rates don't seem to be going downwards year after year. So probably helps with that argument.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? What is causing business leaders in today's world to, I don't want to use this word, but it's kind of tricky, to finally embrace commercial solar? I mean, it's been around for 20, 30 years, but we're finally starting to see more uptake, and even battery storage kind of starting to grow for the commercial sector. What do you think is finally convincing those leaders that it's time to look at this seriously?
I mean, it's a return on investment. And
Yep.
if you think about, you have a facility and you have a revenue generating roof asset potential, right? So your roof either not generating revenue or it is, or your parking lot's either generating revenue or it isn't.
Yep.
And I think folks are starting to understand that this technology is not new. It's proven. There's lots of ways you can fund it and procure it and build it. And it's no longer something that's sort of nascent. It's a business strategy. People will attend universities or fly in certain airports or live in certain states or cities because they believe in the mission of clean energy. And so it's not just on top of an ROI, it's the right thing to do. And the constituents of many organizations are demanding it.
That's an interesting other perspective you mentioned is sort of the tenant and the people who engage with these properties, because I'm seeing news all over the place where the actual property value is increased, right? If you're offering these things and whether it's an office or a multifamily asset, it actually can drive value there.
Yeah, we have seen that. In fact, we did a bit of a pilot on one of our buildings 5, 6 years ago in Spokane, Washington, where we deployed solar on our facility and tested that in the market. And it is true. There's research out there that can substantiate it. And I only see that increasing with time as renewable energy becomes more and more mainstream. People see it's effectively a lower utility bill for the tenant or owner.
Are you seeing property owners combining solar and battery storage to sort of maximize the value of their investment?
Yes and no. So I think, when it comes to the built environment, the application case is more nuanced. And so if I were to give some kind of back of the envelope guidance, I'd say solar almost always makes sense anywhere in the country.
Yep.
So start your mindset there. I'd say with battery storage in the built environment in and around buildings, I'd say approach it more with caution in terms of what specifically are you trying to accomplish with the battery storage? Is this a savings-oriented project or is this a resiliency-oriented project?
Yep.
And if it's resiliency, it's likely to be look more like a capital expenditure type of a project. So if you sort of start with that in mind, I think you sort of can avoid some wasted time in terms of some of the project development work.
How is battery storage transforming resilience? What's sort of the biggest misconception maybe about project economics, how it fits into the overall plan?
Yeah, so we're seeing in the built environment certain applications of battery storage for community shelters combined with solar PV to back up loads, to provide communities a place to go in the event of a storm or a natural disaster. We're seeing there's some grant funded stuff still here and there in the coastal areas in the Northeast in California. Where we see probably the most battery storage is paired with solar and ground mount applications. And so if you are deploying or interested in a ground mount application, battery storage definitely has the highest chance of kind of economic success in those cases. And probably the biggest misconception with it is, I think we've been spoiled a little bit in the market. Like solar always makes sense, right?
Yep.
And so that's probably the big assumption there is storage always makes sense, right? And I think the answer there is more nuanced.
What about sort of the third leg of the clean energy stool in the commercial real estate space, EV charging? What's your take on where we're going to see that go for commercial specifically? And are you predicting major growth there, sort of tracking the solar and what we're seeing early on in battery?
Yeah, so we do have an EV infrastructure team at McKinstry. We're seeing deployments both in the public sector as well as in the private sector. In the public sector, we see some fleet electrification as well as public charging applications. So transit authorities, you're seeing a lot of that, eyes light up in terms of the potential of, managing a fleet and especially the OpEx cost there. On the commercial side, I think it's becoming a norm that tenants drive electric cars and expect to have a place to park and charge a vehicle.
Yep.
And so ultimately we do see a lot of growth. I think we see it in certain cities and states that have enabling policies first and probably where there's more adoption first, but it's a bit of a snowball but it is slowly moving in the right direction.
A lot of the news cycle around clean energy tends to highlight these big Fortune 500 companies that are making investments, Facebook and Googles of the world. What trends from those Fortune 500 companies and their approach to distributed energy can other business leaders learn from?
The big kind of enterprise Fortune 500 folks can typically lean towards virtual power purchase agreements, but they could sort of check the box pretty quickly and easily, right? And say, hey, I'm going to be a stakeholder in this, 200 megawatt plant and there I'm sustainable, right? And while I think that that's a fine solution in certain cases, I think that, what we've seen from mid, sometimes large, and definitely mid and smaller organizations is, they don't have enough capacity to sort of play in that space. And so distributed generation is something their people see, that attend their facilities, that are their customers. Virtual power plants are not. And so I think, some of the larger companies employ kind of dual-edged strategies there, because distributed generation won't get you there on your own if you, have hundreds of facilities and some of them are, don't have land or roofs or whatever. But I think what we can learn is a little bit about being bold. The big companies are bold, they're all in.
Yep.
And I think there's something to be learned for not just building owners, but also, just industry. So that's pretty cool.
Are you seeing that the renewable energy solutions that you're providing are consistently delivering return on investment for owner operators in the commercial real estate world?
Absolutely. Without a doubt, I would say, in the 15 years I've been doing this, the vast majority have all been wildly successful. And what I would say is, there is something to be said for what is your plan for taking care of assets over time.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a big assumption out there that says, hey, there's no moving parts. So solar, for example, therefore I'm good. And that's not what the data shows. The data shows, you know, everything needs to be maintained.
Yeah.
Whether it's a lighting system, a cooling system, a boiler loop, a steam loop, like a solar system, it's a building system that deserves preventative and corrective maintenance and active monitoring. And so as you consider deploying, capital projects, there has to be a strategy on the back end.
Yeah, solar is definitely not set it and forget it. How should folks be thinking about the long-term planning around operations and maintenance of their systems?
Yeah, I think, having a plan is the first thing. So don't be convinced that there's no need for an operations and maintenance plan. And there are different ways you can scope that. So, they're from limited scope to, comprehensive scope. And I think that's responsible and good to think about depending on the size of the system and so forth. But definitely have a plan and include that in your cash flow, I think is paramount if you really want to protect and preserve the return on investment that you made in the CapEx.
One of the ways some folks would protect that return on investment is through like a performance guarantee. Is that something that you guys approach at McKinstry?
We do. So we are one of the larger energy services performance contract organizations, which is fancy we do a lot of energy efficiency for public sector, and we're by law required to provide performance guarantees for a long periods of time, sometimes up to 15 plus years. And so we do offer that selectively, depending on the project and client and if they value it or not, and what that guarantee means, right? Like, just because it's like when you buy a warranty for your car or stereo or something, like, well, great, it says warranty. What does that actually mean? What are you actually guaranteeing, right? Is it parts? Is it labor? Is it both? Is it, so a lot of ways that I think owners should be thinking about someone says guarantee, what does it actually mean?
For the listeners who might not be familiar with a PGU, a performance guarantee, can you just quickly explain exactly what it is and how it works?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the project, when it's designed, there's a performance model that's associated with that projects the performance that goes into a cash flow. Over time, there's a certain amount of degradation that takes place with the equipment. But in the end of the day, that system needs to produce a certain amount of energy each year. And so a performance guarantee more or less stands behind that idea as to say, hey, we're going to measure it continuously 24/7 with our metering systems. And then we're going to own up and be accountable every month or quarter or year, up to and including, paying the difference if there's a shortfall, right? So that's why I said the devil's in the details on what guarantees mean, but that's the essence.
So folks, when they're out there, again, sort of looking at going solar, one of the options they have is to get like one person to install it, another person to sort of manage the asset after it's installed, another person to service it. Can you talk about the other way to do that and sort of the benefits of a single end-to-end system provider for those asset owners making renewable energy investments?
Yeah, we certainly see a variety of approaches out there, not so dissimilar from design, bid, build versus design, build. In solar or battery storage, there's different ways to do it. McKinstry is a partner-oriented company, and so we're really a big fan of partnerships, whether that's with clients or vendors or subcontractors. And, that's a design build mentality, in my opinion. And I think in design build, everyone can win. And I think that, you end up with a single point of accountability.
Yep.
Right. So if you set up that scope and that contract structure the right way, and that's a big assumption, but you got to do it the right way. And if you do, you end up with an outcome you're buying instead of a scope. And I think when you buy an outcome, that's ultimately what, as a building owner, you want is the end result, not, hey, I bought my engineering, I bought my construction, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get to the outcome? And a lot of times you end up paying more because the parties across, and there can be 5 or 6, they're trying to do their scope and move on. And so, yeah, having an end-to-end provider, I think, adds a lot of value in a lot of situations.
Alignment on outcome orientation. I love that. So we've been talking about distributed energy resources. It's sort of goes counter to the traditional energy source in America, the utilities. But how do you see utilities playing a role in the future of distributed energy?
Yeah, it's a big role. I mean, I think we need to look at utilities as partners.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes, there's a bit of an us or them mentality. If I'm putting generation on a site, that's wrong. Utilities are great partners. They manage and own our infrastructure. And I think they play a role in the future in helping manage that infrastructure and help continue to build out transmission, distribution. I think utilities need to, and I'm starting to see them getting more and more involved in ownership or needing distributed resources, whether that be solar or battery storage. You're seeing a lot of requests for offers out there of major utilities sort of realizing, the value of having those assets dispersed. So I think, McKinstry did a pilot project in Spokane where we did kind of a ground up construction of a campus, where we have a bit of a pilot with Avista, the utility, where we share information across the meter.
Mm.
So we built, a timber building that's net zero called the Catalyst in South Landing district of the city. And it's got battery storage and thermal storage and solar and everything. And we more or less share all that information with the utility in our central plant in that building. And then there's a two-way kind of coordination. And so we see that as a bit of the future of where things are going, which is partnership with utility and data across the meter instead of a big wall where, we operate a certain way within our wall and they operate a certain way within their wall. Things are getting more complicated and we have to kind of work together to optimize the energy future.
Agreed. I know you got your finger on the pulse of the industry. What emerging clean energy solution or property technology has you really excited right now?
I know we're early in the built environment with battery storage, but I do think that we're going to see more and more of that deployed, maybe even as a result of EV infrastructure. So it might be EV that becomes the catalyst in the built environment that says, holy cow, look at all this load we need. How much is that going to cost to bring in a new service? Let's put in battery storage and solar, make that kind of an islanded asset. And, that ecosystem of technology, that's kind of how we think about distributed energy. We sort of see it all feeding itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you say the word, resiliency or microgrid, like the controls aspect, I think is really where the complexity comes in and where our industry and the kind of the electrical side of things are definitely going. Maybe just a little bit more on that question. Like with some of our data center clients that we work with broadly, definitely some talk about innovative technologies like small modular nuclear and some other stuff like that. But, that may be a little bit ahead. But certainly I think you may see some of these data centers sort of forced to be super innovative to get those, massive loads served. So I think that we'll keep an eye on that. That may end up driving the scale and commercialization in some of these new technologies.
Glad you mentioned data centers. That's obviously a hot topic across a lot of industries right now. What do you perceive as the possibility of, traditional renewable solar, wind, battery storage helping to drive the energy needs of these data centers?
I think it's part of the solution. I think, not every data center facility is going to have all the space that it needs for solar, but many of them will have large roofs and probably some land as well. I think battery storage, long duration battery storage is going to play a major role there. That's not so far off in terms of either leveraging existing technology today or alternative chemistries that may, eclipse current technologies today. But I do think, some other firm power mix, and it's a little bit tough to guess what that's going to be, but I think that'll mix in with those two things. So, is that fuel cells? Is that, this modular nuclear stuff? Is it, some kind of turbine engine type technologies, a little bit TBD. I'm sure everything will be tried.
You mentioned earlier about all the different ways to finance a renewable energy project.
Yep.
What's changing in how you're seeing organizations approach energy project financing?
Yeah, so I would say first, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed a few years ago really pivoted in a big way organizations to start thinking about owning these assets on their own balance sheets.
Mm-hmm.
That trend has been ongoing for quite a few years, but I would say, with transferability of the tax credits as well as direct pay for public entities, never before has it ever been heavily weighted towards ownership. So, that's not to say it's always the right answer, but it is to say that there's, when you have a developer and a designer, builder, owner, operator, debt, tax equity, sponsor equity, you add all that up, it's a lot of mouths to feed, so to speak. And so PPAs, I think, are great mechanisms to de-risk and to hedge your energy future. But if you have a little bit more of an appetite for risk reward, then certainly ownership is where a lot of private sector clients are heading towards.
You mentioned earlier you'll sometimes take a trial approach to organizations looking to put clean energy into their portfolio. How are the companies who are scaling the fastest with their renewable energy programs, how are they being successful around that? How are they getting the buy-in necessary from investors and whatnot?
I've seen quite a few different approaches. And so I might say, first, having representation within the organization that's, not only a champion, but a champion with influence and authority to drive change.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, that can be like a sustainability C-suite or leader, but I think is preferably, somebody in the C-suite that's, whether that's CEO or CFO is really bought in, because at the end of the day, these are financial decisions that are going to require those stakeholders. And so if organizations really want to make progress, I think, having a clear vision and a clear plan at the C-suite level is where it starts. And then I think the second thing too is sometimes you see folks try to go really fast, right? You say, look, there's this big, audacious, every site in my portfolio. And we like to encourage, and sometimes that might be the right answer, but if you haven't worked out all the dynamics in a complex, big organization, slow down to go fast. And so not so difficult to go get a pilot going, to get 2 or 3 sites going on the vision, learn from it, a bit of a Kaizen approach, and then come back smarter, more efficient, with sharper strategies to deploy in more of a programmatic approach. So yeah, those 2 things, the executive buy-in, really understanding how big of a program that you want to deploy on the outset. And then I think the companies that are scaling the fastest do have some kind of dedicated teams to help administer the project management.
Mm-hmm.
And so companies from the outside need help navigating companies on the inside. And so to the extent there's project managers or leaders that can help drive these initiatives on the inside of those organizations, it goes a long way.
Slow down to go fast. I'm going to remember that one. I like that.
I'll put on the whiteboard.
Yeah, please. What's the most important piece of advice for a building owner considering their first ever solar or energy storage project?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I think I would say, make sure you know why you're doing it. In particular, battery storage, do you have a certain load you're trying to back up? Are you trying to maximize ROI? Are you trying to demonstrate sustainability? Are you trying to do your first pilot to roll out a massive program? I think having a clear idea of sort of what the end game is should drive kind of the first deployment. So I know it sounds simple, but I think sometimes it's easy to, there could be a directive that says, hey, we're going to be X% renewable, let's go. And no one really thinks about why or the details or how it's going to work. And so I would just say, really be clear about the intent.
We're recording this on June 17th. The Senate readout on the One Big Beautiful Bill was just released yesterday. What's your early take on where you see the commercial clean energy industry going over the next few years?
So I won't lament on too many of the details, or, obviously there's some headwinds in the House bill for sure, not great at all in terms of what happens to tax credits and things like that. The Senate bills moves in the right direction. That draft just came out today or yesterday or something. But, I was talking to my team about this just a couple of days ago. I said, let's just zoom out for a second. I don't have the chart, but in if you look at the market fundamentals of energy in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
to start there, the amount of growth we're going to see in the next 10 or 15 years is exponential. Okay. The line's roughly been, horizontal for a while. And in the last few years and into the future, it's going straight up.
Yep.
That's the fundamental challenge that we have in front of us with energy. And 90% of new assets that came online for energy last year were solar, storage, and wind. 90%. So regardless of what happens with this policy, which you may think is good or bad, like that exacerbates a problem that we are already going to have a challenge getting to. So that's the first thing is, a short-term policy doesn't dictate the base need. The second thing is, when you think about clean energy, the time to deploy solar and battery storage is the shortest duration of any technology. So, you look at gas turbines, you look at nuclear, you look at other technologies, and those work towards 4, 5, 6, 10 plus years. And, so if you kind of put two and two together, you say, how do we get there? We have this massive need. We're maybe making policy decisions that take us in the other direction. And clean energy is one of the only ways for us to get there, realistically.
What do you foresee as the opportunity specific to McKinstry? What are your growth plans? Maybe if you want to share your assets under management today, or just where are you guys at in the industry? Are you really seeing the opportunity to just accelerate like crazy the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the last few years leading up to today have been awesomely exciting across our business. And we do a lot of things besides solar and battery storage, from offsite manufacturing for data centers to energy efficiency and building consulting and clean energy generation. So the broad opportunity we see, which we like to serve our clients broadly, is never been better in our 65-year history. As far as, the opportunity for clean energy in the coming years, I think I'm still very bullish about it. I think, we may come out of this policy discussion for tax reconciliation with some headwinds. I think that's very realistic, but that doesn't change how I feel about the mid to long term. So what I think we'll realize if we pass a policy that creates headwinds for us really quickly is that, oh my goodness, we have an energy crisis, And so I know there's a lot of priorities in the policies that are in front of Washington right now, but I think that may be getting lost in, hundreds of pages. So I think in the short term, I think urgency is important. So if you can act and take advantage of, the incentives and tax credits in this sort of window that is optimal, I'd say it's a great time to act. And in the coming years, we'll probably have some headwinds to navigate.
Jeff, this was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it. If anyone wants to connect with you or learn more about McKinstry, where's the best place for them to go? So
our website's www.mckinstry.com. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name's Jeff Hughes. You can contact me at jeffreyh@mckinstry.com. So would be glad to answer any questions or chat with you about the industry or your building, your projects, whatever the case is. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well, Jeff. It was really great to meet you and chat with fellow Sun Devil as well. For those of you listening at home, thank you again for joining us. I'm your host, Sean Swantek. I'll see you next time.